We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another round of the Information Technology Management Happy Hour. Today, we've got some extra special stuff for you, and the extra special stuff is a bit of info about open source software. It's likely that you've heard of this before, but not like this. This presentation will blow your mind. Of course, I'm just kidding. But to get started, what does open source actually mean? On the almighty Wikipedia, it is defined as denoting software for which the original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed and modified. And what does that actually mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that if someone draws up a blueprint, then other people can use that blueprint to build their own stuff, or they could even take the blueprint and find ways to improve it. Simply put, the recipe for work is shared. Over the course of history, there's been a bit of debate over whether or not the open source movement is a good thing, but we'll touch on that later. So looking ahead, like our friend here, let's go over what will be covered in this presentation. We'll start off with the history of the open source concept and movement. Then we'll do some chit-chatting about the benefits and concerns of it. And following this, we'll toss out some real-life examples, and then we'll have a quick recap at the end. And of course, I'll probably throw in some myths or two about what open source software is and means. So without further ado, let's open up this can of worms. A long time ago, in a galaxy called the Milky Way, we had an evolution of technology, and not of the Darwinian sort, but in the 1970s and 80s, with early computing, programmers and developers had a tendency and propensity to work together with or through shared software to learn and evolve. Then in the 1980s, there was a shift, and in this shift, we saw the tech industry move away from the community vibe and into the commercialization of software. But this is not the death of constructive open source communities, because a decade and a half later, Eric Raymond published a book titled The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which was an analysis of the hacker community and free software principles. This shining peak of hope was acquired by Netscape Communications Corporation in 1998, and they were inspired by the book, among other things, to release Netscape Communicator Internet Suite as free software. Now, this software became the source code for well-known names like SeaMonkey and Mozilla Firefox. And then taking a step back, in 1991, we had the largest open source moment, one of the largest open source moments in history. And in this year, Linus Torvalds released Linux as a freely modifiable source code. This software is now used in smartphones, cars, refrigerators. I mean, you name it, and it is in it. In 2004, Time Magazine named Linus as one of the most influential people of today. So still hanging around the later 90s, the Open Source Initiative was born to encourage open source principles, and we see a following start to form behind this movement. But not without resistance. And in 2001, a Microsoft executive said, open source is an intellectual property destroyer, and a whole bunch of other things about these progressive techniques used to advance the potential of software and technology. So today, open source software is extremely common and has revolutionized the way developers and programmers work, effectively influencing our day-to-day lives, and we will likely see things of this nature to continue to exist throughout the years. Now, let's go ahead and discuss some of the benefits of open source technology. The first being cost. Now, it is technically free, but a great way I've heard it described is that it is free as in kittens, not free as in beer, meaning OSS requires ongoing maintenance and attention. However, this still widens the opportunity of input to develop and enhance the coding world. Next, we have flexibility, and with OSS, we allow source codes to be modified and remixed to fit the needs of today's consumers. Third, open source software helps prevent vendor lock-ins. This means no outrageous monopolies over software, which is good for 99.9% of everybody. Imagine if you had a sports team with one extremely talented athlete and a handful of decent players? Would you rather be on a team where that talented athlete shares their tricks and principles with the other team members to help them grow, or a team where the athlete keeps it all to himself or herself? Which team do you think would have a better record? Then fourth, security is worth mentioning. While one may initially think OSS is less secure because of how open it is, original authors of code can license out who works on it or who is allowed to edit a code, meaning skilled programmers and developers are allowed access, and they'll be more likely to hold themselves accountable because of their reputation and demonstration of competency being on the line. And that's good stuff, huh? Now, the thing is, the grass is always greener on the other side, but that doesn't mean there aren't moles in the field. So when it comes to OSS, there are a couple of concerns as well. First being that it can be difficult to use. So if an employer wishes to teach a new employee how to use the software, it may be easier to use what's already available, which takes us into the next point. Oftentimes, a paid software is the standard and more generally understood and more generally understood to be the standard. For example, Microsoft Excel and Word are commonly used today, making them effective tools, even though they have to be paid for. Third, sometimes software acts up and needs to be fixed, and when issues arise, paid software providers can oftentimes provide better support. And finally, people tend to stick with projects longer if they're being paid for it as opposed to working for free. So if stability and longevity are worth a penny to you, maybe you ought to invest in a proprietary provider. Now that you have a better understanding of what OSS is, let's take a quick, and I mean quick, glance at a real-life example of this stuff. I think WordPress is a great start. As shown in this graphic, the user is able to access WordPress's database, edit it, revise it, form it, and use it to their own needs. This graphic is quite extensive, so I won't dive wholly into it now for time's sake, but it is worth further research if you're interested. Just give you a sec to look at this and how it goes from the user over on the left to the URL, browser, HTTP request, flows through the internet into WordPress and their systems, and then back through the HTTP response. Now, a couple myths that exist about OSS or open source software is that there's no control, and that the originator can actually decide how a project is guided. So it's not quite like Wikipedia where anyone can go in and work on it, but as mentioned earlier, it has to be licensed out. So there is some control over this. A lot of people say it's unsafe, but in reality, many people form a community to support the integrity of a project, not to tear it down. And then it's not a matter of everything being free, because the source is free, the code, the blueprint is free, the map and the how-to, but it's really just sharing information, and it's not giving you anything more than knowledge, which is worth considering. So for a quick recap, of course, OSS has a rich history, and when software was commercialized, there was a stigma against it, at least at a small extent. But as time has shown, it is being more widely accepted. Then this lasting movement will likely continue well into the future. And obviously, there's some great benefits associated with it, but there are some concerns worth acknowledging. And of course, who doesn't like myths? So that's why I wanted to debunk a couple of those for you. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Come back next time for the ITN Happy Hour.